This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Okay, so we're now towards the end of a series that I've really enjoyed, and it seems like the Sangha's enjoyed as well. We've been looking at the Karaniya Metta Sutta, which is a beautiful and significant text that comes from the Buddha, and it's the Buddha's teaching on how to live. The Buddha said, this is how you need to live if you want to reach a state of perfect peace. This is how you need to live. And then the Buddha goes on to then lay out how you need to live in a very straightforward, practical way. And what you see is he's presenting a path to enlightenment in terms of metta, in terms of loving kindness. And so we've been exploring this text, and also through that exploring metta bhavana and how we can live the spiritual life all the way to enlightenment, to insight, to enlightenment, to awakening through loving kindness. As part of that, we've seen that the text could be seen as reflecting different versions of the path. It can be. So to begin with, there's the Buddha's threefold path of ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And you can see there's a section right at the start where the Buddha talks about how to live ethically. And then in the center of the text, the Buddha talks about how to meditate, how to practice the metta bhavana. And then it culminates with the Buddha describing the fruits of that in terms of wisdom. But we've been also looking at this in terms of Sangharakshita's presentation, the Triratna system of the Dharma life, these 5 stages of the Dharma life, or 5 aspects of the Dharma life. And we've been exploring this alongside the Karaniya Metta Sutta, how to live your life. And to begin with, the Buddha said that, well, you need to start by becoming a capable person who's honest and straightforward, contented, living a simple life, keeping your sense experience calm. He's talking about ethics. And we look at this in terms of integration, becoming somebody who's consistent in all of the different areas of your life, somebody who can walk the talk. So it's a cultivation of ethics and integrity, integration. Then we looked at how the Buddha describes how to cultivate metta and positive emotion. The Buddha says, meditate like this. May all beings be happy in their heart of hearts. May all living things be well. And he talks about different categories of people, of beings that haven't been born yet, beings that are living now, all these different categories of beings. So it starts to look similar to the metta bhavana practice that we do, where we bring to mind these different categories of beings. And the Buddha says, develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for all beings. Develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for the whole universe. And he says to cultivate this all the time, whatever you're doing, whether you're sitting, traveling, in bed, in all your hours, rest in this state of mind in metta. And he says that's like living in heaven right here and now. So that all of that really, well, it's positive emotion, and then we're seeing how that cultivation of metta actually leads to insight, which is what a stage we call spiritual death. The death of our view of being separate from other people in the world, the death of this kind of sense of a separation where we're interested only in ourselves, or mainly in ourselves, and not about other people. We identify it mainly with ourself and our needs. That dies. We see through that. We see clearly. That gradually dissolves that boundary between self and other. So we've been exploring that Parinitageva talk, looking at that aspect of insight which can come through the cultivation of metta. Last week, Franyu Hidayah introduced us to some Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but particularly the Buddha Amitabha, as an embodiment of reality, as an embodiment of loving kindness. And that is the aspect of spiritual rebirth, where we can develop a relationship with something that transcends this self-other dichotomy in terms of a figure, a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure, and we can awaken those qualities in ourselves through contemplating that figure, getting into relationship with that figure. So we looked at that last week. Franyu Hidayah looked at that last week. So this week I want to talk about the end of the path, the goal of Buddhism, in terms of metta and compassion, in terms of the Karaniya Metta Sutta. looking at the life of the Buddha, looking at introducing some other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Grihantara and Avalokiteshvara. And then ending by looking at how we can cultivate some of the things I'm going to be talking about in quite practical ways. So, to begin with, I just need to wake my device back up. It's gone to sleep. Hopefully you haven't yet. Okay. If you get bored, you can look at the pictures. That's what I always think, when there's nice pictures to look at. So what happens next? At the end of the Metta Sutta, the Buddha culminates by saying, well, if you dwell in this state all the time, whatever you're doing, in this way you will leave all wrong views far behind, and you will experience the spiritual insight that is beyond words and concepts. And going completely beyond craving, you will be liberated from the wheel of samsara forever. So the Buddha talks in terms of going beyond craving, insight, and being liberated from the wheel of samsara. But that isn't the end. That isn't the end of the story. It isn't the end of the path. And sometimes it's presented as though that is the end of the path. It gets presented as basically you get enlightened and you're liberated and you live happily ever after. It gets presented in sometimes a kind of almost like a self-orientated way that this became a little bit of a stereotype sometime after the Buddha died, that some traditions, they focused so much on liberating the self that they had an ideal. It's called the Arahant ideal, which is that someone become enlightened just for themselves. They'd become enlightened. They'd be happy ever after. They'd live in bliss, but wouldn't necessarily teach other people. And that that to me sounds impossible. That sounds like a contradiction. That the idea that somebody who no longer experiences this boundary between self and other, that isn't the end of the story. Liberation from the wheel of samsara isn't the end of the story. So I want to explore what happens next. What happens when somebody is liberated from the wheel of samsara completely? How would they live? How would they be? And there's a bit of a gap here. The Buddha doesn't say this in the sutta. And so sometimes people have filled that in a particular way, and different versions of what the enlightenment might be like emerged. And I think there was a bit of a gap because the Buddha didn't need to say what the Buddha was like, because people could see what the Buddha was like. People who lived at the time of the Buddha, they could see an enlightened being interacting with the world around them. They could see how he responded. They could get a sense of his presence and his heart. So a being of metta, a being of loving kindness, who's liberated from the wheel of samsara, who no longer experiences himself as separate from others and separate from the world. How would they live? How would they behave? So the culmination in the path, in terms of our 5 stages of the path, is called spontaneous compassionate activity. That's the kind of the goal of Buddhism in terms of metta, is spontaneous compassionate activity. So I want to I'm going to draw on some verses from Shantideva, who lived in the 8th century, and he really evoked this compassionate way of practicing and living in a text called the Bodhicharyavatara that we draw on a lot and is drawn on throughout the Buddhist world. So some verses from Shantideva, who describes how a being might be that kind of, when you no longer experience the difference between self and other. This stream of mental moments I call my mind. These ever-changing elements I call my body are not some separate thing that exists in its own right. So who is this separate person that someone's suffering belongs to? Suffering is just suffering. It has no owner. I should relieve it just because it is suffering. Those who have developed their mind in this way, who feel this joy in releasing others, they are the ones who are truly fulfilled. What is the point in some cold liberation just for oneself alone? So he's really refuting Shantideva, the possibility that you could become enlightened and then just be liberated just for yourself. Actually, when someone becomes enlightened, they then live to serve other people. They respond to the world around them, the suffering around them, And that's what they live for. They're full of energy, creativity, no longer conditioned by craving and delusion. And whatever they meet, the suffering they meet, they respond to it. And you can see this in the Buddha's life. So maybe the Buddha didn't talk about it so much because he didn't need to. People just had the example of the Buddha. So I just want to revisit the Buddha and some of the examples of how he lived in this way of just responding compassionately, spontaneously to the needs of the people he encountered. To begin with, well, what did the Buddha do after he was enlightened? He basically walked for 50 years around India and basically tried to share the Dharma with everyone that he met, no matter who they were, all kinds of walks of life, all kinds of castes, all kinds of backgrounds, men, women, kings, prostitutes, poor people. He just taught everybody he met, and those who could be liberated were liberated. That was what he lived for, was to establish the Dharma and share it and to liberate people. So he just spent the rest of his time walking around India, trying to free people from suffering, the people that he encountered. He could have just sat and put his feet up and meditated and been blissful. And he didn't. He chose to wander around and immediately to seek out some friends and try and communicate the Dharma to them, then to establish a community. Then he told this community to go out separately in different directions and spread the Dharma as far as they could. So he was compelled, he was driven for the rest of his life to try and liberate people. And we are the benefactors of that. We're the recipients of that. But there's examples, just very practical examples of how he just responded to the suffering with compassion that he met around him. One very touching example is when he arrived. He used to go around from community to community visiting his disciples just to see how they were getting on. And one time he visited some of his disciples, and he'd always travel with his friend Ananda, his cousin Ananda. And they arrived at this particular hut, and they found an elderly monk. And he was sick, and he was lying on the floor in his own dysentery, basically. And he said to the monk, "What's going on? Why haven't the other monks looking after you?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm not really any use to them, so they don't look after me." And the Buddha straight away sent Ananda to get water, and they cleaned up the monk. They put him back in his bed. They made sure he was okay, and then he got the monks together and gave them a telling off. Basically, he told them that you must look after each other. You've left home, you've left family, you look after, you care for each other. But it was very, very practical. He just literally got his hands dirty. He just did what needed to be done. There wasn't a question of, oh, let's go and get these monks to sort this guy out. They just did it. The Buddha and Ananda just straight away wanted to get this monk comfortable and looked after him. And then there's a story of Kissa Gotami, who became an enlightened disciple of the Buddha. But when he met her, she was stricken with grief. She'd lost her only child, and her life had been thrown upside down, and she'd gone mad from grief. She couldn't accept her child had died, and she wanted medicine for her child. And someone sent her to the Buddha. And rather than the Buddha just saying, "Your child's dead, I can't help," the Buddha said, I can help you. And he sent her out to find a mustard seed from a local house, but it had to be from a house where nobody had died. And Kissa Gotami went off full of hope and optimism and knocked on all the doors in the village. But gradually it dawned on her, every door she knocked on, somebody had died from that household. And gradually the message sank in for Kissa Gotami. She kind of woke up out of her grief and realised everybody dies, death comes to everybody, and suddenly she was receptive, and she asked to become a disciple of the Buddha, and eventually became an enlightened disciple of the Buddha. So you meet another example of the Buddha just responding to the person he met, someone that no one else could really help, but he could just enter into the world of Kissa Gotami and draw her out of that grief, actually into the Dharma. So he would just do that. Whoever he met, he would be able to meet them on their terms, connect with them, and then communicate the Dharma if they were able to receive it. Basically to try to liberate them from suffering. So Shantideva in his text, there's some verses which kind of capture this a little bit. He says, well, we're all the same. We all feel the same suffering and happiness. So I should look after others as I look after myself. Just as I love and cherish my body, which is divided into many limbs, so I should love and cherish this whole world, which is divided into many beings. I should dispel the suffering of others because it is suffering like my own suffering. I should help others because they are living beings, as I am a living being. When we all want happiness and all fear suffering, what's so special about me that I only look after myself? So Shantideva is evoking this state of mind that the Buddha we can see exemplified in the life of the Buddha, where he just lived in a way just to try and draw people out of suffering, to liberate people from suffering. And that line's made me remember something which I'll share with you. It is where it says, they are living beings as I am a living being. I'll tell you in a tea break, actually, because I think I'll share. Now I think I have to share the story. Now I've decided I'm going to share it. So I went to meet Sangharakshita one time, and I was more arrogant than I am now. I was very arrogant, and so a bit self-centered in a way, like the opposite of what I'm describing the goal of Buddhism was. But I'd recently been ordained, and I was very proud of that. And I thought that I would go and start a new Buddhist centre. And I was going to go and start a new Buddhist centre in either Hull or York. And I hope there's nobody from Hull or York I'm going to cause offence to. But I was very arrogant, and I said, I don't think the people of Hull would get the Dharma, Sangharakshita. And he looked at me and said, well, you got the Dharma. He said, you're a living being and you understood the Dharma. And they're living beings, they would understand the Dharma. So I felt very chastened. I kind of afterwards, sometime afterwards, I felt chastened because at the time I didn't really take in the kind of reprimand because I was so full of myself. But the idea, well, they are living beings and you're a living being. So it's the state of a Buddha or an enlightened person, just as Shantideva describes. Well, they are living beings as I'm a living being. So they suffer, I suffer. They fear, I fear. They're not different to me. Yeah. So there's a very poignant example from the life of the Buddha in his final days. When we have the Parinirvana festival, one of our festivals, we hear an account of the Buddha in his final days, his final months and weeks and years. And that's very, very moving because what you hear about is the Buddha facing death, but it doesn't affect how he lives. He still lives in exactly the same way. He still tries to spend every last minute liberating as many people as he can and making sure other people are okay. Incredible generosity and compassion, but very, very moving. And even when he realizes he's going to die, he's been poisoned by a disciple of his wanted to cook a meal for him and his disciples. He eats the meal, gets terrible pains in his stomach, and just says, bury this food, don't let anybody else eat this food. Kind of has to go practice mindfulness just to kind of bear the kind of discomfort and the pain. And then afterwards sends people to say, go and find Kunda, the guy who cooked this meal, because I don't want him to feel bad that he's killed the Buddha. He's going to tell him that it's really auspicious to have served the Buddha his final meal. That is a really auspicious thing to have done. So even when he's realising he's just been poisoned and he's going to die, he felt compassion for the person who served him the meal. He didn't want them to feel remorse or to feel bad about it. I mean, that's amazing. And then you hear about the Buddha traveling from place to place to visit his disciples, even though he's dying and he's very, very ill. He still travels on foot from village to village to communicate the Dharma and just to tell people about ethics, meditation, and wisdom. He goes around telling them about that over and over again, making sure they understand. And then just as he's dying, just as you think, well, now he can have a rest, now just relax. He overhears a conversation where someone wants to meet the Buddha and the disciples are trying to send him away. So, look, he's dying, just don't bother him. And the Buddha overhears the conversation, says, no, let this person come to me. So this wanderer comes over and asks the Buddha about the Dharma, and the Buddha responds, and then this guy says, I want to become your disciple. I want to go for refuge. And the Buddha said, well, you've come from another tradition. You need to, our principle, our rule is that you need to wait. I think it's 3 months or maybe 3 years. There's a set period of time before you can be ordained. And this guy says, well, if that's your rule, I'll wait 30 years. I'll wait as long as it takes. And the Buddha says, okay, if that's your attitude, I'll ordain you now. And then the Buddha ordains his final disciple as he's dying. So it's just incredible. I mean, if you can have the idea that an arahant would just be enlightened and then live in bliss. That's the complete opposite to what the Buddha did. The Buddha just spent the rest of his hours, really, until he died, his final minutes, just living for other people. So the goal of Buddhism can be, you can see how metta, if you're really living through the cultivation of metta, as the Buddha describes in the Kainiya Metta Sutta, you can see how gradually you're starting to identify less and less with your own self-interest, and you start to care more and more for other people, to the extent that gradually that divide between self and other becomes more and more tenuous, more and more subtle, until it's not there anymore. And then you just, you're free to respond to the needs of the people that you meet with tremendous energy and compassion and generosity, as the Buddha did. So that was the Buddha. And then we met Amitabha last week. We were introduced to the figure of Amitabha, the Buddha of loving kindness and meditation last week, who sees the unique quality of every phenomenon, every living being. That's his wisdom. This evening, I wanted to introduce two more embodiments of enlightenment that particularly capture this spontaneous, compassionate activity, this action and reaching out to respond to suffering in the world. And the first of those is the figure of Green Tara. Hopefully you've all encountered maybe this image of Green Tara before, another image of Green Tara before. And she has this, she has the posture, hand gesture of supreme giving. So her hand is opened out into supreme giving, which is another way of trying to symbolize what I've been talking about with the Buddha, that it's a supreme giving of everything, in a way, everything that to other people, to other beings. And her other hand is in a gesture of fearlessness. She's associated with calming and reassuring, giving fearlessness to people. But her foot, a particularly important thing about Green Tara is her foot is stepping out of the lotus. She's stepping off the lotus and out into the world, because she will respond swiftly if you call on her, if you need help, if you're suffering. Green Tara lives to exist to alleviate that suffering, to lift beings out of suffering. So it's that reflex, it's that action of stepping out from the lotus into the world is kind of captures what I was talking about with the Buddha, who's just responding to suffering. So Green Tara is an embodiment of this spontaneous, compassionate activity. And another figure who is beside Green Tara is the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara. And again, hopefully you've encountered this figure before and this symbol before, this being before. Avalokiteshvara both Tara and Avalokiteshvara are very, very hugely popular, and there's lots of devotion all over the Buddhist world to both Tara and to Avalokiteshvara. The mantra of Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hung, is all over the Himalayas. It's written out on stupas and stones all over the Himalayas. So both of these figures are very, very famous, and there's a lot of devotion towards them both. But particularly Avalokiteshvara has become a symbol for our order and also for our Sangha. So I want to talk about that in terms of compassionate activity. So there's a story associated with the creation of Avalokiteshvara, the coming into being of Avalokiteshvara in this form. So it's said that Avalokiteshvara was somebody who, we could say, is trying to live this path that the Buddha is describing, this path of compassion and compassionate activity and metta, loving kindness. And so this story is set way in the distant past, kind of so far back it kind of might be outside of time. He set a vow. He wanted to alleviate all beings from suffering, and it kind of sounds a bit naive and arrogant maybe, but he sincerely he thought, I can alleviate all beings from suffering through meditating. And he went off to meditate on compassion and loving kindness, really devoutly, really resolutely. But he set himself this kind of caveat that if I ever turn my back on this, if I ever decide if I ever doubt this, if I ever decide not to do this anymore, may I shatter into 1,000 pieces. That was his vow. And so Avalokiteshvara, we're told, goes off and meditates and meditates and meditates to alleviate the suffering of all beings. Incredibly long time, comes out of his meditation, comes out of his retreat, and just sees the suffering all around him. Maybe he's more sensitive to it from all of his meditation, but he's overwhelmed by the suffering around him. And he's overwhelmed, and he just cries, I can't do this. This is impossible. I can't alleviate the suffering of all beings. And at that moment, he splits into 1,000 pieces, we're told. He shatters, he splits into 1,000 pieces and cries out. And we're told that Amitabha, who we heard about last week, Amitabha, the Buddha of loving kindness, comes to his aid and reforms Avalokiteshvara into a being that has 11 heads and 1,000 arms, and a being made of light. And Amitabha is the 11th head right at the top. Amitabha's head is the 11th head right on the top. It's quite a bizarre story, really, isn't it? It's a bizarre story and a bizarre image, we might say. To us, it just looks a very strange image. But if you contemplate that I think there's a real, it kind of evokes maybe the heart of this path of altruism and what we call the Bodhisattva path. Longing to live, to alleviate the suffering of other beings, but also being limited by who we are and struggling to overcome our conditioning, our selfishness and our self-interest. And there's a tension, real tension, which caused Avalokiteshvara to die, spiritually die and be reborn. Something out of that effort, Avalokiteshvara died and was reborn as something completely different, something that transcended who he was previously, who could respond to the suffering of the world. Somebody who had 1,000 hands that could respond in 1,000 different ways to whatever the people he encountered, the beings he encountered, needed, whatever the different forms of suffering. So it evokes maybe a being like the Buddha who could just enter into the world of 1,000 different people and meet their needs and give them what they needed. A being who can respond in all those different ways. Traditionally, we're told, well, Avalokiteshvara can see in all the directions because of his 11 heads, so he can see all the suffering everywhere. I was reflecting on this this week, and also thought, well, maybe it's that also Avalokiteshvara doesn't have, we have one perspective, which is our perspective. We see things from our own point of view. We see things from what's important to us, what we value in terms of our suffering, what we want to get out of a situation. Avalokiteshvara sees things from all perspectives. He can see things from all sides, which maybe evokes also what an enlightened being might be like, someone who is liberated from this prison of self-centeredness. So we've got, Avalokiteshvara and green Tara, two symbols. And as I mentioned, Avalokiteshvara has become a symbol for our order. Sangharakshita said, well, maybe he's really evoked the Bodhisattva path, the path of the being who strives to alleviate the suffering of others, an altruistic form of practice. But he's also kind of cautioned us and said that it's dangerous to think in terms of yourself as a bodhisattva, yourself as becoming like Avalokiteshvara, someone who could, or the Buddha, someone who could respond to all beings, because there's a danger of our ego hijacking that and we become inflated. I'm a great being who can save all beings, or it's just so impossible that we crash and burn because it's so impossible. So instead, Sangharakshita says, well, we can see our community, our order as a bodhisattva, and every hand is one of the individuals who's committed to live and make a difference in the world, to cultivate metta. We're each one of the hands of Avalokiteshvara, and together we can form a bodhisattva. And he said that, also said elsewhere, that that state of mind, the awakened mind that arises in somebody who is an individual, who all their energies are devoted to liberating beings from suffering. He said actually that is maybe more likely to arise among a community of people who are all practicing intensely. So in the center of Avalokiteshvara's 1,000 hands, he has two hands holding the bodhicitta, holding the awakened mind, that heart and mind that lives to liberate beings from suffering. So Avalokiteshvara has become a symbol for our order. And also we see Avalokiteshvara as a symbol for our Sangha. And we think, well, actually as a Sangha, we can each, out in Sheffield, be a hand of Avalokiteshvara, responding to the people that we meet in our workplace or in our lives, alleviating suffering in a small way, bringing some kindness and some metta. But together, when you put all of that together, it's potent when you get a Sangha of people all living in that way and practicing together intensely. an atmosphere can get created, that can get generated, that maybe you've experienced sometimes at the Buddhist Center. So I want to bring us back down to earth a little bit and end by just talking more practical terms about what can we do to live more in this way? How can we two things. How can we train in metta? How can we train in metta so we can give to the people around us? But also, how can we cultivate receptivity? So I think I'll talk first of all about training in metta, and then I'll talk a little bit about receptivity and explain what I mean by that. So we've been talking a lot in this series about the metta bhavana as a training in this way of living. I've been talking about the goal in a way, something maybe very, very elevated, what it can be like right at the end of the path when you've lived in this way, you've trained in metta, and you no longer experience yourself as separate from other beings. But maybe don't need to worry about that. Don't worry about it, but you can be inspired by that. That's what I think. I'm really inspired by that as a possibility. But I don't worry that I'm not like that yet. That if you can hold both of those things, and then that's a healthy way to relate to the ideal. It's incredibly inspiring that it's possible for a human being to develop that state of mind, and it's okay that you don't have that yet. But what we need to do is to practice, as the Buddha said in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, to cultivate that kind of heart that responds to the beings. And in the Metta Bhavana, two things: you can start to identify with other beings, start to identify with their common humanity. So just as Shantideva says, we're all the same. We all feel the same suffering and happiness. So I should look after others as I look after myself. So in each stage of the Metta Bhavana, if this is a way of simplifying the Metta Bhavana and really essentializing it, just connect to the fact that this person suffers in the same way that you suffer. They have the same emotions that you have. They want to be happy. In a way, the phrases are an aid into this kind of reflection. This person wants to be happy. They don't want to be ill. They don't want to suffer. Wouldn't it be amazing if they could grow spiritually in the same way that you want to grow spiritually? They have that potential. So if you could, in the Metta Bhavana, you can train in seeing people in that way, and then gradually expanding. Sangharakshita says, rather than some paths of Buddhism teach us to kind of focus on wisdom in terms of ourselves, looking at our own sense of self, trying to find it, trying to see through it. Sangharakshita says it's kind of as well as doing that, it's much healthier to expand your sense of self to include more and more people. So you're already concerned about yourself, great. Now become concerned about more people, become concerned about strangers, about people you don't like, about all, just expand that to include more and more people. You can train in that through the Metta Bhavana. And in the final stage, equalizing. It's really important to start the fifth stage by seeing, can you have an equal response of metta to all the people from the different categories? So two things in the Metta Bhavana. Can you see the common humanity in the people in the different stages? And can you try and cultivate an equal response of metta in that final stage and expand that out? But then there's also training in metta off the cushion. In daily life, really, really, really important. If you can live, well, the Buddha says in the sutta, in all your hours, whether you're sitting, resting, lying down, whether you're at work, whatever you're doing, train in metta. And there's another verse from Shantideva, which I think I find it a very beautiful evocation of the impact you could have on the beings around you if you're training in metta. So Shantideva says, we should give up frowning and always have a smiling face, being the first to greet and talk to others, a friend to the universe. We should speak kindly and look straight at people's faces, as if drinking them in with our eyes. I can't do that with all of you. There's too many people and they're overwhelming. But the Buddha, Shantideva says, train in this way. So off the cushion, the Metta Bhavana we do in the meditation, but in your daily life, be the first to greet people and talk them, put them at ease, smile at them. Be friendly, be a friend to the universe, and really look at people with kindness and drink them in. Imagine the impact you would have in your life on the people around you if you could train to do that in that way. So that's training in metta. And one thing I'm going to come back to for the groups is there's an attitude you can bring in. This is homework for you if you choose to accept it for the week ahead, a practical challenge. Can you think of a situation where you could change your attitude from a self-centered attitude to a more altruistic attitude? Maybe that might change a difficult situation or a dynamic, rather than thinking about, well, what about me and what can I get and what are my needs in this situation? Try and turn it on its head and think, well, what can I give to the other people in this situation? Can I think about the other people? And that could magically transform that situation. That's my invitation for the week ahead. Metta in terms of generosity and this attitude of what can I give in a situation. So that might be something to follow up in the groups. And finally, in terms of meditation, I want to talk about receptivity very briefly. Because another way of talking about this aspect of the spiritual life is receptivity. In terms of the goal, it's spontaneous, compassionate activity. But in terms of where we're at now, we talk in terms of receptivity. So I'm going to because I've gone on for a long time, so I'm going to talk about this very, very quickly, which is that it's really important that we are cultivating metta and we think in those terms of the law of karma, that I am doing the metta bhavana, I am cultivating metta. But then there also comes a problem when you're trying to overcome this sense of self and a separate self. And we exist where we experience it now. We experience me in here and other out there, self in here and other out there. So I think there's times where we need to turn that around and come on in. So we need to turn that around and rather than thinking of me making metta, me generating metta, me cultivating metta in the metta bhavana, can we be receptive to something other that isn't me? Can we have periods where we're not active in meditation, where we're more receptive? And this can take different forms. So we often encourage people to just sit at the end of meditation. So you can have lots and lots of time where you're active in meditation. And then at the end of the meditation, we say, well, just sit, don't do anything. And in that, it's often in the pauses right at the end when we're not doing anything. That's when often fruits can arise. We talk about fruits arising, or transformation can occur, or a glimpse of a different way of seeing a situation suddenly can arrive, or your mind stills in that situation. So we encourage you just to have pauses, moments when you're not active. And there's a rhythm in meditation as well, in either metta bhavana or mindfulness of breathing, where you have spells when you're active, when you're really active in meditation, and then spells when you need to be receptive, where you're not active, you're not doing anything, you're just resting. And I'd encourage you, because you might be just doing, and there's no room for new states of mind to emerge or for transformation to happen because you're not leaving any space. So just try having pauses in your meditation where you're not doing anything, where you just relax, just rest. It might be your mind drifts off and you need to be active again, but then just rest and see what happens, and just play with that being both active and receptive in meditation. So in the metta bhavana, you drop in the phrases, you bring something to mind, you're being active, but then be receptive. Just see what happens after you've brought the person to mind, after you've dropped the phrase in. Be receptive. So just the importance of receptivity, both in daily life, times when you're not busy doing stuff, and really importantly in meditation as well. So something to play with in your meditation practice. Okay, so I'm going to end with Shantideva again. I've got a poem, but I think there's not time for the poem and Shantideva, so we can have the poem before meditation. Let's see if Sangha wants to do the poem that we might have. So that's encouragement to stay for meditation, so you can hear the poem. So this is Shantideva, with a final bit of advice about spontaneous, compassionate activity. And Shantideva says, "Whoever longs to quickly save themselves and others should practice this supreme mystery, exchanging self and other. All the suffering in the world comes from obsession with ourselves. All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. Why say more? The fool looks out for his own benefit. The sage acts for the benefit of all. Just look at the difference between them. So to cure my own suffering as well as the suffering of others, I devote myself to others, and I will see them as myself From now onwards, the welfare of all beings is my concern. These limbs and this body belong to all beings. It would be wrong to use them just for myself.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.